welcome to episode 18 of Rhody Rumble. Today we're grateful to be joined by Athletic Director of the University of Rhode Island, Thorr Bjorn. Appreciate you taking the time. How are we today?
Adam, I'm doing great. It's so good to see you, and thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll start with any big plans for the summer?
One of my daughters is getting married. It's the first one, so that's our biggest plan and focus. So I'm excited, and I can't believe that's even possible. But no, it's certainly an exciting time for my family. So thank you for asking.
Sure, that's great. So a question we always like to start with and lead off with is, what motivates you?
I think in college sports, it's funny. Obviously you want to win, and that's important, but that's not the greatest motivation. I think the greatest motivation, as cliche as it may sound, is impacting young people's lives in some way, whether directly or indirectly. And anytime that I think about students that are participating in sports here that leave and then come back with a smile on their face and great appreciation for their time, that's my motivation. And anything that we do here is certainly trying to win in the present sense, but then also, give the students everything they need from an academic support standpoint to be successful. But it's how are they going to think about their experience 5, 10, 15 years from now? Are they going to look back and say, wow, Rhode Island really cared about me. They really did everything they could to help me be successful and reach my goals. Without a doubt, that is the greatest focus and inspiration that I think we should all be striving for.
Yeah, that's great. I think definitely student athletes looking back down the road and looking at their collegiate career and remembering the kind of impact that coaches and even athletic directors had on their career definitely means a lot to them. I can't speak for myself, but I've spoken with a couple of postgraduates from the basketball program and even current players, and they've even brought that up, that the coaches and the administration through the collegiate process really made an impact on them and helped them beyond their collegiate career. But I want to start a little bit with your background prior to the University of Rhode Island. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you got to URI?
Sure. I went to the University of Massachusetts, played football there, and earned a bachelor's degree in sport management at UMass, and did a quick internship at UConn, but then went back to UMass. My first full-time job there was director of tickets and game operations, and that was right around the time, it was the time when John Calipari just started things going at UMass. And so, my first experiences there right from 1990 till 1996 in that capacity was winning 5 conference championships and 5 A-10 tournament championships and going to 5 NCAA tournaments and going to the Final Four as a ticket manager. So it was a really cool experience. And, like I said, I did that for about 6 years, and then was fortunate enough to get into marketing and corporate sales at UMass also. And did that for about 3 years and loved it. I knew that was part of the sort of the external side of the business that I really enjoyed. But at that time, I was also a young father with 3 kids under the age of 3 and was making very little money. And so was kind of getting burnt out, to be honest with you. So I ended up having an opportunity to go work in private business up in Portland, Maine, and loved it. I did that for about 3 years and then went back to UMass. And at my time at UMass, the second time, I was really overseeing all the external side of the business. And 4 months onto the job, the athletic director that hired me back was not the one I had worked for previously, left to take the job at Baylor. And I was fortunate enough to be named the interim athletic director at that time, and did that for about 6 months. And that's when I really learned that that's what I want to do. I want to be an athletic director. I learned a lot during that 6 months. I didn't learn everything, but I learned a lot. And then the AD that was hired was really good to me. His name was John McCutcheon. He elevated me to truly his number 2 person, and we worked really closely together. 2 very different sets of strengths. So we made a really good team. I did that for about 3 years, and then was fortunate enough to come here.
Sure. So something I'm really curious about, especially from an athletic director standpoint, is I follow you on Twitter and social media. I know that you always keep up with all the different teams. There's so many different teams that Rhode Island has. But how are you able to kind of keep up with all these different teams of all these different sports?
No, thank you. You know why? Because it's important. And, I think when I think about the time commitments that our student athletes are putting in and our coaches are putting in at the end of the day, I think it's really critically important that I know when they're playing, who they're playing, how they're doing, touching base with our student athletes on how things are going. But I know I probably drive my wife crazy, but I'm looking at my game tracker. If I'm not watching a game or in person at a game, I'm watching it on game tracker almost all the time, just because I want to see how we're doing. And, do I live and die by each game? No, but pretty damn close. I mean, it's kind of crazy when I think about it, probably to a fault, but, I love watching our teams compete. And, sometimes people will ask me, what's my favorite sport? Whichever one's playing, whichever U or I team is playing is my favorite sport at that time. And because I do really value the time and the effort and the energy and the work that everybody puts into pulling it off. Never mind just the student athletes and the coaches, but then the support staff that's going behind it, the marketing team, the media relations people, the trainers. I mean, there's a lot that goes into every contest. And so, when you win, you feel good for everybody.
For sure. For sure. I know you just congratulated the rowing team on their recent victory of the Atlantic 10 Conference. But what would you say is the most challenging thing about the job itself? I mean, there's so much going on in a typical day. You're watching so many different games. And like you just said, the background behind each game, there's more that goes into the game itself than being played than the actual game. Or I should say the preparation into the game. But what would you say is the most challenging thing about the job?
It's a great question. I think, trying to, this may sound cliche or may sound like it's just the right answer, but I believe it, making sure that we're providing the level of support that our teams need to be successful, and that could be any number of different things. That's not just financial support. That could be the way our trainers are staffed and funded so that they can provide the right type of treatment. Do we have the right number of strength and conditioning people working there to help put them in position to be successful? Are we out, able to fund coaches, that are successful in a way that allows them to want to stay here? Because, again, money doesn't motivate everybody, but it's certainly an important factor so people can be a little bit more comfortable. So I think it's all those different things and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward. It's the great thing about sports, and which is different than a lot of businesses, it's certainly different than a lot of areas in higher education, is that there's a winner and a loser. And, you're really held accountable based upon success. And so, when I think of, that pressure that coaches must feel, I want to take that pressure and burden as well, because it's not fair to leave that right on them. I think anytime that we have to make a coaching change because we're not successful, it's a failure on our entire department. We haven't done what we needed to do. And it doesn't just fall on the coach. That's not fair. We have to own a piece of that too. So I think, making sure that I continue to understand that responsibility is really important. And yeah, I think that's probably the greatest challenge. Are we doing enough? Thinking creatively enough to put our coaches in position and our student athletes in position to have the greatest possible experience and success.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I remember when you spoke to my journalism class a couple months back, you really emphasized that these student athletes at the end of the day are, kind of just like me and just like regular people. And I think a lot of people, especially sometimes the media and other people, fans, tend to put a lot of pressure on the athletes and the coaches. But they really have lives as well, and they really have families that they go home to. And that's a really great point that you brought up there.
No, thank you.
But to kind of flip that question, what would you say is, I mean, you kind of mentioned it briefly before that, it's cliche, but to win, but really the best part of the job.
Without a doubt,
yeah.
Without a doubt, the best part of the job is interacting with our student athletes. Not even close. Getting to know them, getting to see what they're all about, getting to know what's important to them, seeing them at commencement, seeing them win a game. That is, I'm getting the chills. I mean, because I really believe that. I love that part of my job, and it's the most fun. Even when they're struggling, and the fact that if a student athlete may be struggling and they come in to see me, and it doesn't happen a lot, but I always tell them my door is always open. Stop in anytime. Every student athlete has my cell phone number. They can call me anytime or text me anytime they want to. because I want to know how they're doing, and that's not to talk to them about X's and O's of the sports that they play, because then I would only mess them up in that regard. But it's more to see how are you doing, and we care about you. And I really, in my heart, hope that a majority of our student athletes really feel that way, because that's really, really important. And that is by far the most enjoyable part of my job. Not even close. Nothing else even comes close.
Definitely. That's great, having an interaction and being able to have like somewhat of a relationship with all the student athletes. Like I mentioned before, there's so many different teams and so many different sports really at URI. I mean, we have 2 or 3 different seasons, and you're able to interact with all of the coaches and all of the athletes and have a relationship with them. But you've made so many different or difficult decisions in the job. You mentioned before, one of them you mentioned was, transitioning coaches. And I would say hiring a new men's basketball coach was probably the most recent, moving on from Dan Hurley. So what was that process really like, and what really stood out to you about Coach Cox?
Yeah, great question. As I get older and more experienced, I think it's important to find coaches or staff that are, and I use this word now probably to the point where I'm annoying people on our administrative staff here, but to me it's fit. Are they the right fit? And that can come across in a number of different ways. It doesn't just mean that they're a nice person or a hard driver or whatever. It means that they're going to fit within our culture and understand the strengths and weaknesses that we have within our department and at the University of Rhode Island. And they're going to embrace that and really allow themselves to be successful. Utilize those strengths to be successful, overcome the weaknesses that we're going to have that may be systemic, but they just are what they are. We can sit around and complain about things we don't have, but what are you going to do to try to make things better? And that's really important. Dave Cox is, I was fortunate enough to know him. And when we went through this, I sat down with him after Dan left and I said, look, I'm not promising you anything. I want to be very transparent with you. We're going to go through a full search. And the only thing I will promise you, and I said this at Dan's press conference, is that Dave will be a finalist for the job. He earned that right. He had the experience and the knowledge to be a finalist, but then it was really up to him. And in part, I wanted him to earn it, and not from a power play perspective. That's not what I mean. It has everything to do with nothing was handed to you, Dave. You've never had anything handed to you in your life. You earned this. So we interviewed some great coaching candidates, and at the end of the day, made the decision that Dave would be the best fit at that time. And I've loved working with him. I think he's a great role model for our students. I also know no different than when I took the job here. I think Dave would admit this. When I took my first job at age 39 here at Rhode Island, I learned a ton in the first 3, 4, 5 years. I know I'm better at my job now than I was when I started. And I know as I've seen Dave grow and learn and make mistakes and then also have successes, he's a better coach going into year 4 than he was going into year 1, because it's different. Being in charge is different. And there's a lot more pressures and a lot more accountability and a lot more spotlight. And so, it was a really thorough process. And at the end of the day, like I said, I felt Dave was the right fit. And I believe that in all my heart now. Are we winning as many games as he would like or I would like? No, not we had a pretty good year his first year, a great year his second year. Struggled a little bit down the stretch. And then this year was frustrating. He'll be the first to admit that. But it was a weird year. But I believe that he is the right guy to do that self-evaluation, to really hold the guys accountable and talk to them about what they need to do to be better. And then the same with me. I look at that and say, okay, what do I need to do to be better? How can I be of greater impact and help to Dave? And again, I say this kind of being funny, but it's not. I mean, I'm not talking about getting involved in their daily responsibilities. That's his job. They don't need me with my suggestions about who's taking a 3 or who's not taking a 3. That doesn't. Some ADs may do that. I'm not one of them.
Yeah. And I think it's great because Dan really built up this program to what it was. I mean, you obviously think about the championships in 2017 and 18, and Coach Cox really was there throughout it. He was not the head coach, but he kind of watched this team grow and kind of understood and learned more about the ins and the outs of this program. And I think that at the end of the day, he really knows what's best for the team. And, I'm really impressed with, again, you can't be too frustrated with the season they had because of circumstances and, the world that we're living in. But really, I think he's done a great job with this program and turning it into what it is. I mean, I know he probably, or I think he does a lot of the recruiting as well, in the DMV area, which is great.
Yep.
So, I'm impressed with the program. Obviously, I'm a big fan myself. So, my dad is a alumni of URI.
Oh,
So
great.
I grew up
Excellent.
watching URI basketball. I'm from New York, but I grew up watching URI basketball. So I'm impressed with what he's done. But sticking on the basketball topic, I guess, but switching over to the women's side, can you talk about the process of bringing Coach Reese in and really what your thoughts are on, their recent success? She just won the Coach of the Year. She's done a great job with the program, especially within the last year or two. Can you talk about what it was like bringing her into the program, into the university, and then your thoughts on their success so far?
Sure. I will never forget our first conversation. I will never forget that. And I share that conversation a lot with people, especially if I'm ever talking to a group of young coaches who are trying to break into head coaching positions. So when we made the change with Daniel the Force, we were starting to put our work together on how to go out and really try to recruit a coach. And Shane Donaldson, our assistant AD for media relations, came by and really just dropped her name on my desk and said, "Tammy Reese, this is who we should go after." And so I said, "Well, tell me more." So I did some research. He filled me in, and he actually said, she'd like to talk to you today. So I was driving up to Providence to see our softball team play at PC. So I called her and we talked for about 45 minutes, and it was an incredible conversation. I certainly got the sense that she was trying to find the right fit. I talked to her about my vision and where, the shortcomings that we've had and what we wanted to do and commit to get better. And we had a wonderful conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, she said, "Thorr, you haven't asked me my strengths and weaknesses yet." And I said, "Well, Coach, this is just a preliminary conversation. I'm sure we get into that later, but she goes, "Well, I'd love to tell you." She said, "Obviously, I've talked about my strengths, but for my weaknesses, I've never been a head coach." And I said, "Well, prior to me getting here, I'd never been an athletic director full time, really. So you need your first chance." And she said, "Yeah, but I want to tell you why. I wasn't ready. Now I'm ready. And I know I'm ready because I think differently. Every decision that we make, I think about it." And this was our time at Syracuse, as a what would I do as a head coach? How would I handle this as a head coach? And again, I get the chills thinking about it. That level of self-awareness is unprecedented in my time in this business. I've never heard anybody say that to me. It was, I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. You know what? Many people aren't ready for that first job. And sometimes they try to rush to get it too soon and they're not successful. I think she did it very thoughtfully, and obviously she's proven that she is ready. And to go to your second part of your question, I know the first year was frustrating to her. We just weren't able to, the culture she was trying to create based upon the players, good, wonderful people that she inherited, it just wasn't the fit, wasn't working. But this second year it did, obviously. And we started off a little tough because we had some injuries. And then when it started clicking, it really clicked. And whether it's how they perform as a basketball program, how they're competing in the classroom and being successful there and in the community, she's changed that culture in less than 2 years. And that, again, is pretty special. And, we were thrilled to be able to assign her to a longer extension and put her in position, again, to hopefully be comfortable and happy and knowing that we want to invest in her and her future and do everything we can to let her achieve her goals, which is to win at the highest level in women's college basketball. And I feel very confident we can do that, especially with her as our leader.
For sure. And I know she's brought in a couple of big names, at least within the women's college basketball and college basketball transfer portal and just recruitment as well this offseason. So the future, I think, is definitely bright for that program. But I'd like to talk about enhancing and really improving athletic facilities around campus. So within the last couple of years, we look at the URI football field being redone, and now men's and women's basketball facilities soon to come, with donations coming in and stuff like that. I just want to know what really goes into executing a big project like that.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And it starts with vision. What do we think we need to do, and planning and vision. And the first big project that we did here was a new weight room that's not really new anymore. It's probably 7 or 8 years old, but it was, again, that was a vision. Where is there a need? There was a need that we need a varsity level weight room that we can recruit to and then help students get bigger, stronger, faster when they're here. And then we sit down and say, okay, where can we find donor interest? So with the football field, for example, the 2 donors that gave us each the $1 million were really had a special interest in football. And then we were able to leverage that for another $1 million from a number of different donors to raise the required $3 million to get there. And then Student Affairs stepped up to help us with $1 million too, so $1 million as well. So it's a lot of it's vision. It's then communicating that vision. It's making sure that we have the support of campus, but they certainly haven't hindered us in that regard. The basketball practice facility is very similar. It's the idea of knowing that if we want to be, and I say this without any, animosity, if we truly, we all say we want to be a top 25 team, well, that costs money and facilities cost money. And it doesn't just magically happen. There's 360 teams trying to do the exact same thing that we're trying to do. So how do we put ourselves in position by making strategic investments? And we're a school, and the A10 is, for the most part, many schools are like this, maybe with the exception of Dayton. We're not generating enough money to cover the cost of our basketball program. We don't do it. But there's a real value to a successful program. You said it already, the success we had in 17 and 18 most recently, the amount of exposure we're getting by playing on national television and playing well, that brings great value to the university. So there's an investment, there's a cost associated with it. So if we want to be great, like I believe our alums, our administration, our students and student athletes want to be, great, let's make the investments that are needed. And we obviously have a great arena to play in. We're going to have a beautiful practice facility where students, our men's and women's basketball programs will have 24-hour access. That's the type of thing I talk about when I'm talking about vision. Where is that strategic investment needed? And do we have people that are willing to step up and help? And so far they have been, and that's important. At some point, we're going to have to sit back and say, as a university, when is athletics recreation going to be part of one of those, big statewide bond plans? Obviously with the Fascitella Engineering Center, the Fine Arts Center, the Bay Campus, those are all really important strategic decisions that were made to better the campus and allow us to bring in an even higher quality of student. But at some point, we have a significant amount of costs that we're going to need to bring in, or projects that we're going to need to fund at dollar amounts that we just can't raise. It's just not possible. Whether it's replacement of meat stadium stands on the east side, or soccer press box and baseball and softball press box, or possibly even a new softball field. Those are things that are going to cost significant amount of money. And we need to be part of that. We need to talk about that as to say, hey, we need to be somewhere in line in the next few years that we're included. Because again, that's how we're going to get better. That's how we're going to show that we're committed. That's how we're going to attract more students and even student athletes at a higher quality, talent-wise, to help us achieve all our goals. So you got to make those investments. You can't stop. And once you get one, it's funny, like when we did the football field, and now we're going to do this basketball practice facility, you can enjoy it for maybe like a month. That's fine. We can sit back and say, wow, doesn't that look great? But if we're not saying what's next, we're going to fall behind.
For sure. Another thing I'm really interested in is hockey. So obviously there's the club hockey team, and we have the Boss Ice Arena. And you being UMass alum, I'm sure you know about them recently winning the national championship. And obviously URI being a New England school. Have there really been any talks about potentially bringing in a hockey program in the future, at least at the NCAA level?
It's all about cost, and I've said this anytime anybody asks. If there's an allocation of $4 or $5 million that the university or the state wants to give us annually to say, go start hockey, we can do it. That's fine. That's all it takes, because you got to bring in more staff. You got to bring in, obviously, the program funding of the program. You got to make sure from a gender equity perspective, whether it's starting women's hockey too, or whether it's starting, 2 other women's sports at the same time. There's all those obligations that come into play there. And if that's what the university wants to do, if that's what the state of Rhode Island decides, hey, we're going to allocate funds to do this, it's doable. Do we have the money to do it? Absolutely not. Can't do it. Impossible. Doesn't exist. Some people have even said to me, why don't you drop a sport and add hockey? Well, I'm not interested in doing that. Either we're going to make an investment for the right reasons or we're not, as long as I'm here. College hockey is a great sport. I think it's a lot of fun. I think people can get behind it, but it really comes down to resources. When I was at UMass, that a lot of where that hockey funding came from was a state legislature that said, we're going to make this important. The university, as a result of that, funded it. Hockey at UMass doesn't make money. They don't even come close. I laugh when people start talking about, well, hockey can make money, hockey can do this, or football can do this. Nobody makes money. There's 18 schools or 20 schools in Division I that make money. Everybody else is a cost center. So again, great sport. We actually did a study probably 6 or 7 years ago about what the impacts would be, what the cost would be of starting hockey. So is it doable? Absolutely. All it takes is money.
Got it. Yeah, that was something that definitely interests me, especially with Providence College and the program that they have within the state of Rhode Island, of course, and then a couple other Rhode Island schools having hockey teams. And I was just wondering, especially, with the expectations I had coming to URI, I thought there would be a hockey team, but again, like you mentioned, there's a lot more that goes into really funding that.
It is. It's all about money. Where it really is, and then it's making sure that that money doesn't go away in 5 years. So it's like, hey, okay, because when I was at UMass, hockey was one of the sports I oversaw. And again, it's different. It's 14 years ago, and they've had a far greater success since I've been going. But when I was there, we were generating about 150 to 200,000 a year in ticket revenue, another 100 grand in associated sponsorship revenue. But the budget was $3 million. So you may be bringing in 300,000. But the cost is $3 million. I'm sure it's gone up significantly since then. So that money's got to come from the university through an allocation. And that means the university is making the decision to do that instead of something else. So, and then it also impacts their ability to fund some of their other sports teams, and there's just a lot of impact with whatever decision you decide to go with. And so there's a lot to it. And is it, like I said, I have no problem telling everybody it's doable. Just got to send the money, and then you can't take it away.
For sure. So moving over to football, can you talk about the adjustments that really need to be made and the strings that you really had to pull in order to have the football season this past year, or at least in the spring?
Yeah, I'll tell you, for all of our sports teams, just, give a great tribute to our coaches, to our student athletes, to the sports medicine team, to the health services team. Any sport that we had, it was a real challenge. It's the constant testing, the contact tracing if someone was positive. I was very thrilled that we were able to get 3 games in. I thought there may be a chance for us to get some more, but then we did have an outbreak on the team. It started small and then just grew. So obviously we weren't able to continue, but just really proud of everybody. A program like football is hard because the numbers are so great. And the way you need to try to practice, where you're practicing, 7-on-7 or even 11-on-11, that based on the contact tracing rules at the time, that would mean that if someone tested positive, there's a good chance that whoever they were practicing against is going to be quarantined. And then you just basically shut down. That's pretty much what happened. So it was a very challenging year with all that different stuff. Whether it was football or the 2 basketballs that never missed a game because of a positive COVID test, I couldn't be more proud of the sacrifices that our students made across all sports. It was amazing, certainly frustrating, challenging. It made me so sad anytime someone did go into quarantine, and then we had students that went in for multiple times, 2 and 3 different times, sitting in those hotel rooms for 6 weeks. It's not what their expectation was in terms of coming to college. So I'm glad that's behind us, and look forward to having a normal year moving forward.
For sure. And I think definitely with the NCAA providing or really granting an extra year of eligibility to a lot of these student athletes, it kind of is at least more of a, giving back to the student athletes that had to go through, like you mentioned, quarantining, and really what this past year was for a lot of these teams and a lot of these athletes. But this was obviously one of the best starts in the football program in recent years, although it was only 3 games. How difficult was it to make the decision to cancel the season just after 3 games, and really what went into that?
Yeah, we just didn't have a choice because our numbers were so high. We just didn't have the players. And by the time we were going to get the players back and acclimated back, the last game would have come in. We would have sort of been playing that last game of the year. It just didn't make sense. So it was a disappointing season, disappointing to have to make the decision. It wasn't a hard decision. It was the right decision. So I never really thought about it that way, but I guess that's really how true it was. You know, it was certainly bummed out to tell the team that we had to pull the plug, but at the end of the day, it was our only choice.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was difficult as well for Coach Fleming, who was having a grandchild that same day when he had to announce to the team that the season would be over. And for a lot of those athletes, I'm friends with a couple of guys on that team, and they were obviously devastated about it. But really just this last year as a whole, it's been so long, and, you know, just being able to have played sports is amazing. I did go to the Delaware game, and that was like my first game as a fan back in a year or so. But really touching upon COVID, you spoke to my journalism class a couple months back, and you spoke about being at an Airbnb and being in Brooklyn during the A10 tournament when you had received the news, or really you were part of that process about canceling the tournament and really when the world was being put on lockdown. But can you talk about that experience and really what happened behind closed doors as you are the A10 commissioner or representative for the athletic directors, really what you had to do to cancel that tournament?
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. That seems like years and years ago. But no, you hit it right on the head. You know, when my wife and I drove down to Brooklyn, we checked into the Airbnb, which is right by the Barclays Center. And you know, we got there on Wednesday. So the first two games played, and, you know, obviously COVID was being talked about, but hadn't really thought a lot about it. So Cindy and I went out for dinner. We just walked up the street and went out for dinner. It was just totally bustling, a lot of activity, a lot going on. People were talking about COVID a little bit, but that was it. I got back to my Airbnb and I turned on the TV and I saw that was when one of the NBA players tested positive. And I immediately got a call from Coach Cox. I got a call from another coach in the A10. They were saying, "Hey, what are we doing? Our guys are a little nervous now. This became real." So that night I was on the phone with the commissioner and some other ADs. And then first thing in the morning, because the first game was at noon on that Thursday, we just started talking. We got on the phone and just started talking, and things were just going so fast. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? You don't want to be first. You don't want to be last. You want to make. So we decided, let's make the decision based on truly what's the safest for our student athletes. And it was right up until probably 11:45 that we finally said we got to pull this. It was really going. It was almost like an avalanche. So UMass and VCU were actually out practice, warming up. They were getting ready. They're probably about 5 minutes away from tipping when they heard the news. And so I walked over to the arena. Commissioner Glade was in New York still, but she was part of the selection committee, so she wasn't there. So Mike Rhodes and Matt McCall and I did a press conference and just talked about it and talked about what the rationale was behind it and the plan. And it was absolutely, again, the right decision. So Thursday afternoon, we're on the phone constantly as an AD group again to say, okay, what's next? What are we doing next? What are we doing? And trying to remain, thoughtful in all of our decisions, but we didn't have a clue what was coming our way, not a clue. And so it wasn't much longer after that we made the decision to pull I think the NCAA actually made the decision first to say all spring championships are canceled. And so when they made that decision, we quickly said, hey, all right, let's stop. Spring sports are done. At Rhode Island, we were actually on spring break that week or that coming week. And so, no, we were on spring break that week. So we actually extended spring break the following week. So it just gave us a little bit of thought time and planning time. And, but it was intense. I mean, it was nonstop phone calls, nonstop sort of intense discussion. And, trying to communicate with our coaches, trying to communicate with other people in the A10, communicate with our associate AD group so that they could then communicate down just to try to make it as smooth and quickly as we could because everything was changing so fast. So, I'll look back at that time and say, wow, I really am proud of the people we were associated with and the decisions we made based on the limited information we had at the time. But it was pretty intense. It was pretty intense.
I can imagine how you have to be on your toes so quickly and make such a difficult decision like that, really, to just cancel all sports. I can remember from my end, I went to the Dayton game that night against Obi Toppin, the loss. It was the last game I went to in forever. And then very next day, went home back to Long Island for spring break. And then I was actually supposed to go to the Atlantic 10 tournament. And I saw that morning, I got a notification that I think the Big East canceled first. It was one of those conferences canceled first. And I think they were playing at the Garden. And I was like, oh, great. The A10 is probably next. So I can imagine from your end, holding that press conference and really being on your toes, being behind the scenes and having to make such a difficult decision like that, which really was the start. I mean, was the start to this whole year. And finally things are starting to, come back to normal somewhat. But to be able to go through that experience, I mean, that it's like once in a lifetime, and it's, hopefully we don't have to go through something.
We hope,
like that.
we certainly hope it was once in a lifetime. That's for sure. And I don't remember the first league that pulled out. The Big East actually played a game after we did. But there was another league that did pull out quickly. I don't remember who it was.
It might have been the ACC though.
Could have been the ACC.
Yeah.
Could have been the ACC. And it was crazy. Yeah. Something that I hope we never have to do again. But, I do look back at those times with pride, in that we really came together as a league and really, became closer. I think I'm just incredibly proud.
For sure. Can you talk about, just in terms of URI, how the pandemic has impacted athletics over the last year? Obviously the football team, but really athletics as a whole and just the school itself.
Yeah, it certainly, I think, was an incredible challenge. In this fall when we decided not to play any fall sports, and what does that mean? And then, the constant frustration or confusion about, can you practice? Can you not practice? Can you be around campus? Can you not be around campus? It was all the unknown that created a lot of angst, I think. Coaches in athletics, it's very, black and white, cut and dry. Are we doing this or are we not doing this? The gray area doesn't always work. And I think that was some of the biggest challenge. When I think about, though, back in the summer, a year ago, as a group of ADs, we made the decision to say, we're going to do everything in our power to safely allow our student athletes to compete in some way, shape, or form. And so that was the carrot that was always dangling out in front of us. So every decision that we made on our campus, or certainly within the A10, but let's just focus on URI, it was, let's fall back on that. How do we do whatever we're going to do? How do we make decisions that are going to allow our student athletes to have the chance to compete safely, whatever that looks like? And so that was really the focus. And as long as we knew that as our mission, then I think we had a solid plan to sort of adjust to help us achieve that goal. And, again, brings incredible pride that every one of our teams was able to compete. Maybe not as many games as they would like as, for example, football. But then I look at, baseball is going to play for an A10 championship this weekend. Rowing just earned it. Men's track just won one. I mean, they had a chance, and then they took advantage of it. And it's pretty special. It's not ideal. Something, again, I don't want to say that it's something I'd ever like to do again, but, there's a lot of positives to be taken out of this year.
Definitely, for sure. I mean, you mentioned it right there, just talking about the safety first. It really came down to the safety of the athletes and the coaches and the teams itself. Although a lot of the seasons, so you look at men's basketball, football, weren't successful in terms of winning and stuff like that. And I mean, football was winning, but really just the safety. There were other teams that were successful, and it really was just a learning curve. It was a learning experience overall. Women's basketball had one of the best seasons in the last, decade, really. Rowing and soccer, all these other teams were able to play just in a different kind of atmosphere. But really, It was successful in itself because they were still able to play. They were still able to practice, which I guess is a win within itself. So
it really is. And we have to look at it that way. It's funny. You have to sort of find little successes in times like this and celebrate them. And for all the things you mentioned, I feel really good about those.
Definitely. So with that, what are your expectations for the next academic year, just the next year, in terms of all teams, just University of Rhode Island in general? What are your expectations?
Yeah, no, we're back. We're planning as though we're back to normal. And so, bringing students back for summer camp in August is what our goal is and our plan is. And I think that that's something that it doesn't even feel like a dream anymore. It feels like a reality. So, just kind of going full steam ahead back to normal. Now, could something happen or change that? Of course, but I don't get that sense. So everything we're going to do is with that in mind. And so, it's funny because like it's hard to figure out how our team's going to do because we didn't necessarily get to see a lot of them play. I stayed away from practice. I didn't go to any practices this year, which I usually, not all the time, but I'll poke my head in at basketball or poke my head at football or poke my head at soccer for a little bit and volleyball just to check in 10 minutes. I didn't do any of that. So it's hard to say how are we going to be. I don't really know. So, I'm just excited and I feel like I know our coaches are excited. I know our student athletes are excited to get back to some real normal.
Yeah, and I know you or I either made the decision or is thinking about making the decision. I'm sure it will come eventually that all students, or especially student athletes, have to be fully vaccinated before they come back in the fall. I think they did make the decision.
Yeah, that decision was made last week. Correct.
Yeah, so with that, I guess it will be a little bit more normal and things will, maybe in terms of the success on the field and on the court will be better, but also just in terms of the safety of the athletes and the teams will be a lot better as well next year.
And you know what, Adam? The distractions will go away. The mandatory, right. For those that are fully vaccinated, there's no more mandatory testing. There's no contact tracing. Obviously, if there's a student that decides that for either medical or religious reasons they want to not get vaccinated, there are certain things that they now would have to follow, but their teammates that are fully vaccinated won't have to be held to the same level of COVID restriction potentially based on a positive that comes their way. So, everybody gets to make their own choices. I've got my vaccine, fully vaccinated. That's a good feeling for me. I made that personal choice and excited about that. I'm so sick of masks. That was easy for me. But for the students that make those decisions, I think they'll find that that's going to be a much closer a reality of normalcy. If that makes sense.
Definitely. So the last question I have for you is, what advice would you give to students looking to pursue a career in sports media, really just leading up to becoming an athletic director and taking a similar path that you took?
Every chance you can, Adam. Doing things like this, building your network up is so important. Who are people in this business that can help you and get to where you want to be? Volunteering, starting by volunteering, then working as a student, that's huge. Getting internships is huge. The new program that I'm so thrilled about, that's the partnership between the Harrington School of Sports Communication and Athletics in terms of this coming year, producing and broadcasting all of our athletic events or majority of our athletic events on the ESPN Plus platform. As I think I said to your journalism class, anybody that wants to get into this business should absolutely be taking that class, not only taking it and then saying afterwards, how do I keep doing it? How do I keep doing it? Because that's practical experience that a lot of people aren't going to be able to get. And that differentiates you from somebody else. That's really important. Every chance that you can sit back and say, how can I differentiate myself? If you're traveling to different games or if you're, covering our basketball program or football program and you're traveling to wherever, reach out to me and say, hey, Thorr, do you know the athletic director at such and such a place? Ask Shane, do you know the media relations person at such and such a place? I would like to introduce myself and go talk to them. There are a lot of people that want to help young people grow into this business. There are other people that don't give a darn. And you know what? They're not going to help you anyway, so the heck with them. But there's a lot of people that will never forget those that helped us get to where we've gotten to. None of us got here by ourselves. And how do we then help the next generation of student or young professional grow in this business? That's our responsibility. That's our obligation. And that's my promise to any student that ever reaches out to me, ever, from you or I or from any other school that wants to try to break in. There is never one time that I would not take that phone call or not spend that time with that person, because people have done it for me and I'll never forget that. So that's what you need to do. You need to reach out, build your network up, take advantage of every experience that comes your way, and separate yourself from the masses. Those people that aren't doing those things, that are still thinking that they're going to have an opportunity to get these jobs. It doesn't work that way. It's too hard. There are too few jobs and too many people trying to get in. How do you make yourself special and stand out?
For sure.
Obviously, I have great passion over that. So
yeah, I do appreciate it. I mean, quick question. Just you mentioned the ESPN class. Is that offered already, or like
it's
can
going
I
to be.
enroll
So
in that?
yeah, no, you should be looking in that. I don't know the number and I don't know, but I know
Okay.
it's in the Harrington School in the sports communication major. And we actually worked on it about 2 years ago in conjunction with the Harrington School to go before the university's budget and planning council to request a new position. And then we actually just have laid all the conduit and wiring and fiber to all of our athletic facilities so that we're ready to just plug and play and produce every one of our games on that ESPN Plus platform starting this fall. And so students are going to be, there'll be a new instructor that's hired. They're going through that search right now. They're going to be housed in athletics, but that person will be teaching the class and then teaching all about the equipment, teaching about production, teaching about talent, teaching about every aspect of producing a game. People will be back in the Chafee Broadcast Center, working the control room up there. So there's just a lot of different aspects of TV production that people will learn by doing this level. And it allows us from an athletics, that was our weakest area. We either we didn't do it or we did it very poorly because we didn't have the infrastructure in place. Now I'm thrilled. I think we'll be right up there with everybody else in terms of the quality that we're putting out. But I love it because our students are the ones that are going to be doing it. And so it's a real practical learning opportunity.
That's great. Thorr, I can't thank you enough. You've done so great with athletics. You've been so successful over the years and obviously in the future. I appreciate you taking the time again and really I hope to stay in touch.
Oh my gosh, please do. Thank you for reaching out to me. It means the world to me. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope to see you taking part in that class next year and seeing you at all our games, as many as possible.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Have a great summer.
You too.